On July 17th, 1998, Bill Gove and I took the stage at Bartle Hall in Kansas City in front of 7,000 salespeople. And we delivered a 45-minute keynote together. It was my first big speech in front of a large crowd, and we got a standing ovation. We went up to the exhibit hall where we were selling our $200 video cassette album, which we had printed with all the money we had in our little business's account. And then we went to Kansas City hoping we'd sell some to start our fledgling brand new company. It was about 6 months old. And about 600 people lined up at the gate. And the auditorium shut down the exhibit hall. They locked the doors and we sold nothing. So I went back to the hotel and I called Bob Proctor, who had gotten us the speech in the beginning, and he saw the speech and he didn't know what happened. So I told him what happened, and he said, well, bring me one of the albums to my room, and I speak at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I'll see if I can figure something out. His booth was located right next to our booth in the exhibit hall, but he wasn't on until the next morning. So next morning, Bill Gove, myself, and Dawn, my wife, and my mom and dad were up in the nosebleed section of the hall. Bob Proctor walks on stage and says, hey, did you like Bill Gove and Steve Siebold last night? Weren't they great? Clap, clap, clap. And then he said, I know a lot of you lined up to get their album on speaking, and it was locked. And Bob had the album in his hand. He said, I'll tell you what. He goes, their booth is right next to our booth. And after I give this speech, I want you to go up there and I want you to buy their album, because it's the best album on professional speaking, on public speaking, that's ever been produced. He says, and I've been in this business for 40 years. He said, you got to buy it. He said, as a matter of fact, I'm going to go so far to say that we have a new album out as well for $200. And if you only have $200, if you only brought $200 with you, I want you to walk by our booth and go to their booth and buy their album instead of ours. And he wrapped up the speech by saying this. He said, as a matter of fact, I'm going to say this before I leave the stage. This is almost unbelievable, but this is exactly what happened. This is just a great story, I think. Bob said, if I see you on the streets of Kansas City and you don't have Bill Gove and Steve Siebold's album underneath your arm, just walk the other way. Don't even talk to me. You know why? Because you're not even trying to get better. You need to buy this album. And they did. And we grossed $127,000. It cost Bob's company at least $127,000 to recommend us over them, probably more. Bob's people were livid. They were so mad, and of course I didn't blame them for being mad, but it funded our entire company. We had about $42 in the bank to go back to our office in Florida. Now we had $127,000 to fund our entire company, which eventually became a multi-million-dollar company with offices in 10 countries around the world. But if it wasn't for Bob Proctor and that unbelievable gesture that I don't believe any other speaker would have ever made, I'm not sure we'd still, we would have even had a business, much less a speaking career, at least in my case. So fast forward to 2000, I believe it was 2014, we're holding Bob's 80th birthday, kind of a private party for about maybe 75 people at the Bellagio in Vegas, just kind of a private thing with family and very close friends. Of course, Bill Gove was gone by then. He had passed away years before. But myself and Dawn, my wife, we were there. And I stood up at Bob's party and I told the story, because Bob would never talk about the story. He was too humble to talk about it. And so I told the story to the audience, and Bob walked up to me afterwards with tears in his eyes, and he said, 40 years in this business, he said, that was the greatest night of my life, because I got to give back to a mentor that had given me everything. Bill Gove is the one that taught me everything I know about professional speaking, and I had a chance to give him something back. It was the greatest night of my life in the speaking business. He had tears in his eyes just like I do now, and he walked away. And we talked about it several times, in the next several years. But I'll never forget that as long as I live. It's a lesson in generosity and gratitude. Bob Proctor was exactly who he said he was. On stage, backstage, he was the same guy. What a wonderful man, and what a wonderful lesson for us all in the art of giving and gratitude.